we're living through unprecedented technological change. AI capabilities are expanding at breakneck speed, transforming not just what's possible in education, but how we think about innovation itself. At SRI, we believe that the future of education depends not just on what we build, but on how we build it together. Traditional boundaries between education technology funders, innovators, researchers, and educators are blurring. The old model, where innovation happens first, research evaluates second, and scaling comes third, simply can't keep pace with the rapid evolution of AI. As the government's role in fostering early-stage innovation shifts, new questions emerge. How do we balance speed of innovation with quality? Ease of use with effectiveness? Data security with access and scalability? For 80 years, SRI has been supporting the use of evidence-based educational programs that improve outcomes for kids with and without disabilities, young children, K-12 students, and college students. SRI supports the development, evaluation, and scaling of innovative programs that improve learning, teaching, student achievement, and career and college success. At SRI, we are partnering with innovation developers, funders, and educators to ensure that AI innovations have real impact. This includes using faster methods to assess the effectiveness, ease, scalability, and impact of AI innovations in education. Join us to learn more about how we ensure the best learning and outcomes for students in an era of rapid change.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to our first PARC Forum on the Potomac. I am Jim Fritz, Senior Vice President at SRI International. PARC Forum is actually a long-standing Silicon Valley tradition where we bring together some of the great thinkers at the intersection of society and technology to talk about the challenges and the opportunities in front of us. And we're really excited today to have a really tremendous panel to talk about the future of education in the age of AI. And I know it's a really exciting topic, and I'm really excited to hear the panel talk about it. Those of you that may not be familiar with SRI, I just wanted to give you a quick view. We are an independent nonprofit research and development organization headquartered in Silicon Valley, but with facilities across the US. We really pride ourselves in the great depth and breadth of the technology services that we provide in research and development. Everything from computer science to bioscience, everything from quantum technologies to cybersecurity, everything from robotics to wireless technologies, and of course, everything from AI to education. But for us, it's not just about the technology, it's also about delivering those solutions to the world so that they have impact. We have a very active group that does technology licensing, creates startups. Over our history, we've created 50 startups with over $100 billion of value. And even more recently, over the past 5 years, through one federal agency, we've launched or supported 24 different startups that have a current valuation of over $800 million. So very involved in turning the work that we do into real-world impact that changes things and makes people's lives better. It's also built on a very strong history. Literally billions of people around the world use SRI technology every day, whether it's your computer graphical user interface, whether it's a computer mouse, whether it's checking your FICO score, or using Siri on your Apple iPhone. Those are all things SRI was involved in and part of our legacy, as well as things like the first personal computer, the Alto, the first autonomous robot named Shaky, as well as being the first organization to receive a message sent across the ARPANET, which is the forerunner of the internet. Before we actually get into the panel, just a couple logistical things. When we get near the end of the panel with like 15 minutes to go, we'll be handing around index cards. You'll see somebody holding those little 3x5 cards. You can write questions on them. We'll collect those. And at the end of the panel discussion, our moderator will use those to ask some questions from the audience. And then also at the end, we'll have a nice reception set up in the reception room off to my left here. Really beautiful space, great view of downtown DC if you haven't kind of looked out there yet. So we're hopeful everybody can come in and enjoy that as well. With that, I would like to turn it over to our president of our education division, Todd Grindell. Todd, over to you.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Jim. And Many thanks to all of you for coming and joining in person, those of you who are online, and for our panelists for sharing their thoughts on insights on AI and education. So as Jim said, my name is Todd Grindal, and I'm the president of the education division here at SRI, where I have the privilege of supporting more than 120 colleagues who are tackling the toughest challenges across pre-K to post-secondary education. So as Jim noted, the Institute has been for more than 80 years creating one world-changing solution after another. So it's no surprise that the intersection of our focus on education and the focus of the Institute, that we're having a lot of these conversations of how does AI shape the future of education. So those of you who are in the field know that this is not the first time we've had excitement about the potential of some new technology to reshape teaching and learning. So I remember my first day of sixth grade. I arrived in my first day of sixth grade, and the homeroom teacher told us that we were going to be the first class to have this revolutionary technology that was going to fundamentally change teaching and learning. It was going to bring the world to our classrooms and reshape everything that we had done before. So the big news, what did we have? We had cable in our classroom, right? I think cable in the classroom did not live up to those expectations. But it wasn't the first or the last time that this had happened. If you dig back, we had similar conversations about radio. We had similar conversations about film. And since then, talking about the internet, talking about online courses and MOOCs, what we found is that US schools are remarkably good at absorbing technologies without fundamentally changing how teaching and learning happen. So time and time again, these innovations are introduced with the promise of some revolution, and instead they just kind of bend to these existing structures. And while there are certainly some differences in the education I had in the 1980s and 1990s, and those that my 15-year-old son are having today in class, like the fundamentals are pretty similar. And I think more importantly, these grand promises about dramatic changes in better learning, more equitable opportunities, and meaningful gains in student well-being, they just haven't been delivered. But I say all that, but I think this might just be different. I think artificial intelligence may just be that fundamental change that we've been talking about for so many years, but we've got some big questions. So what is the role of a teacher when a machine can customize the learning experiences to meet the unique profile of every student? What does it mean to be educated in a world where the whole world of knowledge and skills is at your fingertips? I think the important question we have today is how can we, as adults, how can we envision a future for children that leads them, supports them to lead productive, fulfilling lives when it's hard for any of us to really understand what does 5 years from now look like? So we're fortunate here today to have assembled a panel, a group of people with really unique perspectives on these and other pressing questions as we look to guide this revolution to produce the meaningful improvements that have been promised for us for so long and just haven't been realized. It's my privilege now to introduce Afua Bruce. Afua is a public interest technologist with experience in government, nonprofit, private and academic sectors. Afua is knowledgeable about how we can reshape the use, development, and funding of technology for social change. Her book, The Tech That Comes Next, How Changemakers, Philanthropists, and Technologists Can Build an Equitable Future, presents a vision that is more than of a more just world, along with practical steps to achieve that. She's the founder of ANB Advisory Group, a firm that specializes in supporting organizations to develop, implement, and fund responsible data technology. So with that, I'll pass it to you.
I get settled here. Is this working? Y'all can hear me? No. Let me get some good for online. Okay, working now. You all can hear me a little better? Yep. Okay, wonderful. And I was just stalling to make sure everyone could sit down. So thank you, Todd, for that introduction. I am really excited to be joined by these experts up here to talk about the future of education and really the role of AI in education. Our panelists today are allocating resources at the philanthropic, venture capital, and federal levels and supporting an ecosystem that uses AI to expand opportunity and improve outcomes for all students. As Todd mentioned in his remarks, we're not the first to think that we should talk about how AI and education should go together. But I'm hoping that over the next hour, we can have some conversations that haven't been had as much. So I hope we can dive into what is the research and evidence base for using AI in education? Does infrastructure need to change in an AI-enabled education world? And who should develop and deliver tools in education? So let me introduce the panelists for today. I'm joined by Leigh Ann DeLyser, the Director, the Center for Education, Research, and Innovation here at SRI. Erwin Gianchandani, who's the Assistant Director for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships at the National Science Foundation. Kumar Garg, who's the President at Renaissance Philanthropy, and Fernando Fabre, who is the CEO at Kauffman Fellows. So thank you and welcome to all of our panelists. Okay, let's get started here. So every week there is a new headline about AI, about a new AI capability and discussion of how we should prepare students to enter and compete in an AI-powered world. Yet education is happening today and people are making decisions about what to put in curriculum. Educators and parents must make these decisions now. How do we balance rapid innovation with rigorous evidence-based learning? Leigh Ann, I'm going to start with you.
Well, first, I want to say thank you to the panelists for joining us here at SRI and to all of you in the audience, whether you're online or here in the room, for this really interesting conversation. That question about balance is really hard, right? So if you're a tool developer, whether you're a researcher in a university or a CTO of an ed tech startup, right? You have certain forces pushing you to make decisions about time, personnel, how you're spending your money. And so we have to think about what are the things in the field that are really driving those choices that people are making, right? It's really expensive to do evidence testing. And I hear little chuckles in the room like, it's really expensive to do evidence testing. And if you're a small little scrappy ed tech startup, what's more important? That you get another school district to sign onto your product and 100 more teachers or 1,000 more students? Or that you come to a research firm or a company or you hire a chief of research in your own department that gives you that kind of high quality evidence for the impact of your tool? And I don't know we have good drivers of forces within the field that help that decision balance, right? As opposed to leaning on the more eyeballs, more teachers, more contracts, more income so that I can scale. So I think it's hard, and the forces don't balance it.
Yeah, the forces certainly don't necessarily balance it. Kumar, I saw you nodding as Leigh Ann was talking, and I know that you do hard things and have a track record of doing hard things. So can you weigh in here? How do we think about that balance between rapid innovation with rigorous evidence-based learning?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's great to be at SRI. It's great to be on such an esteemed panel. I guess part of the challenge always when you're talking about technology-based innovation is one is goal setting and the two is like how do you measure against goals. So here's what I mean. So we're like a couple years into ChatGPT, and yes, the big AI labs are putting out new versions of the frontier models every month. One of the things I always ask people is every time a new model comes out, there's a press release attached to the model, right? It's like a 2-page press release. And it's actually like a very clean press release. It just lists how the model has done against all these benchmarks. Here's how it's doing on SWE-bench, on the programming benchmark. Here's how it's doing on this stuff. And I say, on all the things we care about, like how does it do at education? Is there a benchmark? Like for that, there's like a nice little like gauzy video of one student that like typed in something and got something really useful. But like if you said, oh, like it's really useful for programming, I have a video of one programmer, you'd be like, oh, well, what's the, and so I think that we actually have tools to measure progress. We just don't actually systematically think about those tools on things that drive economic and social mobility. So one question is like, what would a benchmark in education look like, right? So you could actually say, this model is actually doing a better job than this previous model at delivering on tutoring. So one of the things we've been exploring is something that we call an LLM arena. Basically, you put up two LLMs against each other, but the input-output is a learning outcome. So you say, okay, this learner does not know this thing. They take a pre-test. Then they have X amount of time with two different agents. And then you do a post-test. And then you say, oh, there was no change, there was some change, or was there differential change between the two? Now, you could then critique that model, but it's way better than a gauzy video, right? So my question, I think, is we do not even yet have the measurement tools to actually know whether this stuff is getting better. So then when we say to the industry, like, hill climb on our hills, it's like, what are we, hill climbing in AI is based on measurable targets, right? That you can actually then get better on. The way we got to automated speech recognition is we knew, oh, is it doing a better job of actually capturing your speech? We have to decompose education into a set of tasks that can be, then you can then say, is AI doing a better job? And that gets you away from this question of like, is AI solving it all or is AI not solving it all? Because you don't ask the question, just because AI is really good at automatic translation, that doesn't mean like, oh, now like all the work is done. It's like automatic translation then embeds into some other strategy, whether it's like you can pull it up and you can get bus directions when you're in another country or you're learning a new language. So AI is a tool, just at a tool level, doesn't even have the basic precepts in education. Then I think there's like a second order question, which are what are hard problems in education that you actually would want AI to solve? And I think on that, the key thing, I think people jump too quickly to automation of humans. So it's like, oh, could it actually just replace the teacher? I think like a sub question that like is more interesting is what's something we actually know is good, like experts agree, this looks good, that we do not have enough humans to do, where AI could actually provide a supplemental role. So like a classic one is, and you're seeing this with like Duolingo and other things, where they're generating assessment items at now a fraction of the cost. Assessment is really expensive. We don't have enough folks building assessments, so you have to have these like really precious question banks that get like locked away where no one gets to look at them. Duolingo started using these automated question generation. They have infinite question banks. You can take the Duolingo English test as many times as you want. You only have to pay the $70 when you pass. Why is that? Because under the hood, question generation is now 10 times cheaper. So I think like those are the places where if we're going to figure this out, we're going to start. Not like this sort of either or question around like, did we just like solve education? Because like that, what technology do you wake up and you say like, okay, now this big thing that we call like human learning, that's like, we figured that part out.
Right. If anyone here knows how to just magically solve education, please get in touch. Yeah, go ahead, Erwin.
So first of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. And thanks to everybody for coming out today. I just want to double down on something that Kumar hinted at, but just to be very explicit about it. Education, and forgive me if you're a teacher or instructor in the room or online, education is messy. It is not a clean recipe from one setting to the other. Classroom environments, in classroom and out of classroom environments, regardless of whether it's a formal or informal learning setting, it is a messy environment. You have students in all different contexts. You have students coming from all different backgrounds and perspectives. And so I think this notion that AI and innovation in AI can be a panacea to solve all of that is really a misnomer. And I think to your point about we need to appreciate that it's hard and there's a balance here. There is absolutely a balance here. And that, I think, is precisely why whenever we think about technology-based innovation, whether it be for education or other environments which are complex, you have to start with the end user. And even that, in this particular context, is that much more challenging because the end user, there's the teacher and there's the student. And somehow being able to attain their perspectives in anything that you are designing and anything that you are implementing, I think is an incredibly difficult proposition to be able to get right from the very beginning. And so I think that, yes, there's this tension of we want rapid innovation, but we have to acknowledge that that is being done in an environment that is inherently perhaps one of the more complicated and complex environments that there is, where we're introducing AI or advanced technologies to bear.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I'm just going to call on Fernando here because, Erwin, you bring up the fact that it's messy, that education is messy because people.
I don't mean that in a bad way.
Of course. People are inherently messy and not defined. I mean, I am perfect, but the rest of you have some work to be done. But Fernando, I want to pull you in here because I know from your vantage point, one of the things you think about is how people are working together, how things move around. Money has already come up twice in this conversation. So as we're thinking about this balance in AI and education, who are the stakeholders we should be thinking about, and how can we create feedback loops between the stakeholders to really generate some of this meaningful evidence that we're talking about?
All right. My turn to say thank you for having me here. I'm going to constrain my answer to a more narrow field of, first, we're talking about applications of technology for the education of the students. We're not talking about admin or productive software for the schools, right? So it's sort of education-centered, and where the student is the end user and the teacher, professor is in between. And then the other thing that I need to constrain my answer is that the K-12 universe is entirely different to the higher education universe, which is entirely different to the workforce development. And in a way, you can think of it as, workforce development has attracted most venture capital money in the education space, in the business to consumer side. And then higher education, second place. And K-12 has attracted very little because it's mostly in the either government, state, or nonprofit world, right? But when we think of stakeholders in a narrow definition of the private investment side, I would say has to be focused on the higher education and workforce, where I always say that the stakeholders everybody's a stakeholder in education, governments, parents, students, but the ones that matter are the students and the teachers. And if we add a third one, is the product developer of the technology itself. Where your question about the stakeholders and the feedback loops between them, those are the only three that matter for a feedback loop in a way. And I was having this heated debate early on outside here where I do believe that rapid innovation and the balance in education is not that different to the corporate world trying to adopt new technologies. There's that bureaucracy that I think it serves a beautiful purpose of slowing things down, because education, you don't want to use your quote from one of the prep calls, you don't want to move fast and break things in education. But I do like the idea of teachers having the degree of freedom to test things in the classroom. I believe in the capacity of the teacher based on the principle that they want to do no harm and they have best intention, that is the student's learning outcome. So let the teachers adopt and adapt to new technologies, because that facilitates rapid innovation, adoption, with the idea that if you have 100 teachers in your school and 100 teachers are adopting different technologies, in a year you learn which are the technologies that have a better outcome than not, and that permits a much faster adoption. And that's the case of multiple technologies that we've seen, like CERN, for example, started in a few schools and then it came adopted by everyone. So the stakeholders that matter in the feedback loop are those, the teachers, the students, and the product developers, that they need to have that feedback loop almost instantaneously of, are the students more engaged? That's one metric that you can get almost right away without knowing if they're learning more or not, but just having them more engaged in this technology, learning algebra, it probably is a sign in the right direction. Or not enough, let's make sure we tell the product dev so that they gamify something of the application, right? So this process of continuous feedback loops that I think works best, and it works with any technology, any industry. Those are the stakeholders, users and product developers, and the feedback between those.
Absolutely. I want to shift gears just slightly to one of my personal favorite topics, since I'm the moderator, which is infrastructure and the infrastructure that is required for AI, the infrastructure that is required for education, thinking both physical infrastructure here and digital infrastructure. As we think about the future of education, as we think about how AI should play into that, what type of infrastructure is needed to ensure that AI really supports students and empowers students? Leigh Ann, I'll start with you, and we'll go down the line.
That's such a great question, because I think we have a ton of folks in this room and online who do work in this space in some way or another, whether they're an educator, a researcher, a developer, an investor, a industry leader. And I think if you ask each of them, Kumar, to your point, like, what are you measuring against? You'd get 1,000 different answers. Each person would have 4, and then those 4 would be different from any 4 you saw anywhere else across the room, right? And so I think to complement, we need the digital infrastructure. My PhD is from Carnegie Mellon. They have things like the data shop, where it's an open access way that anyone can upload data from an edtech product and run against standard metrics of performance. So you have that like digital data infrastructure. But I think we also need infrastructure of shared norms. What are we trying to reach for? And I think if you're talking about like, what is that feedback loop to the developer, I don't know that there's a good one right now, because I don't know we all agree on what we're trying to achieve, right? I don't know we all agree, like yes, student engagement is really important, but student engagement doesn't always signal academic outcomes, right? And how do we find the balance between the two? Like, drill and kill software that a teacher like sits their student down and does may improve performance on standardized testing, but oh man, the kids are going to hate math class, right? And I know for the National Science Foundation, it's just as important that we put people on a pathway to STEM careers, which means they actually like the material as much as do well in it. So I think we have a lot of different things that we have to agree on, and we don't have the infrastructure. There's a lot of disparity in terms of who has access to the computing power, the data. Oh man, the data is really important right now in order to be able to do what's next, and do what's next in a way that works for kids and teachers.
Data, definitely really important for AI and for education broadly, what we do track, what we keep, and the information we don't. Erwin, I'll come to you next with this question of infrastructure. What infrastructure needs to be built? What's already in place that can be used?
Yeah, so I think that when I think about this question, I sort of think through the lens of the different kinds of infrastructure and their specific use cases or purposes, right? So just to build on Leigh Ann's comments, first, there's the notion of the ability to be able to give students access to the tools or the capabilities to help with the learning environment itself, right? So I think you talk about who has access, who doesn't have access. I think that starts from a place of, if I'm a high school student in a classroom and I'm in Mississippi, or I'm a high school student and I'm in a classroom here in Northern Virginia, the resources that are at my disposal to be able to have the exposure to AI, to capabilities that I'm trying to leverage to be able to learn the basic competencies in these fields, whether it be math, whether it be computer science or anything of that sort. I think we have a wide variability in terms of what's available today across different parts of the country. And so I think that there's infrastructure just in terms of in the classroom setting to be able to give students the exposure that they need to learn the skills that they need in some of these emerging technology areas and domains. The other form of infrastructure, to something you also mentioned, is infrastructure around, okay, how do I collect in a secure, in a privacy preserving manner? How do I collect data and information about what's actually happening in the classroom setting so that it's not Big Brother watching, but it's actually collecting that in a way that is anonymized and allows me to be able to then put it to researchers to conduct the experiments, conduct the analysis, to understand what's happening and draw inferences from that can inform, adaptations going forward, both in the tool set as well as in how we're doing the learning in an AI-ready environment going forward. So, I think we're excited at NSF in the sense that we're trying to provide investments that cover both of those spaces as far as infrastructure is concerned. In the last year, we've actually in partnership with some philanthropy that Kumar and team helped facilitate, we've invested in one of the largest infrastructure projects around the data side, trying to be able to capture and make available data sets around education in K-12 environments to allow for that research, to allow for that experimentation to happen. There's a $90 million investment headed up by Rice University together with a whole host of other institutions around this resource. We've also, one of the things that, I'll take myself out of the education domain and put myself in another domain for a second. Translating from one domain to another is very hard for reasons that will become clear very quickly. But a number of years ago, NSF invested in a project in Missouri focused in the healthcare space, right? There's security, there's privacy considerations there as well. The project was to retrofit an elder care facility with cameras, AI at the edge, sensors at the edge, right, to be able to track individuals in that elder care facility as they were going about their day-to-day activities. Why? Well, some of the data coming out of that, later analyzed, interpolated, and so forth, helped us understand that you can actually predict from the data changes in gait that could give rise to falls, predictive of falls. And falls are one of the biggest problems in the healthcare space, in the healthcare industry in our country today. And so retrofitting or turning that healthcare facility into a test bed environment unto itself, right? So how do we, in a secure, privacy-preserving manner, facilitate sort of living laboratories, if you will, in classrooms themselves to be able to take data, analyze those data, measure the intervention, an understanding of the interventions that we are exposing our students to and what's working and what's not working. So we just in the last few weeks, announced an investment in what we're calling AI-ready test beds to a project team that I think the PI that might even be here today, looking at trying to be able to think about a testing environment in the classroom setting as well. So I think there's different forms of infrastructure as I think about this question. It's about the tools and resources to give students exposure to emerging technologies as they're learning in the classroom, like AI and so forth. There's also the infrastructure that you need to be able to then analyze those interventions and what's working and what's not working.
Absolutely. You mentioned a lot in there, and I think some of the things to highlight are the importance of collecting the information in secure ways that protect privacy and anonymize data that's there. We're back to measurement and evaluation, what's working and what's not working. You implicated Kumar, so I'm going to come to Kumar next. But before I do, just a reminder to folks in the room that if you have questions for our panelists, you can write them down on a card, and someone will be coming around, or maybe is coming around, to pick those up, and that's how we'll handle audience Q&A at the end. But Kumar, as we think about this topic of infrastructure, what would you add?
Yeah, I thought Erwin's points were really good. I think I'll just sort of like, the place I would sort of push on is, I don't think most people have good conceptual models around what is the infrastructure that AI sits on. Mm-hmm. So here's what I mean, which is it has some natural advantages. It sits on top of all the connectivity and digital infrastructure that we have, right? So like, people are loading up on their phone and they're interacting with an LLM. A lot of the infrastructure to power that already existed, right? So that's why I think you're having such fast experimentation and adoption because it's riding on top of basically ubiquitous phones, like real near ubiquitous connectivity, lots of already online usage, right? That already exists. What the most rapid progress in AI that's happened has been on, in the past couple of years, the scaling laws around large language models. Those are taking up really large data sets, what was first called like sort of these huge training runs, and now is switching into more of this reasoning model. But a lot of that is big one-time spends to collect lots of data and train it. And then the companies are switching to some of this like post-inference compute type thing. All of that means that the companies are chasing general use, right? They want to build the most powerful models that can work in the widest set of settings. The computer science industry has always been interested in this, but generally it tries to think about how can we eat the whole, it's like we build the internet, you could use it for everything, And because of that, you basically have almost no work happening within the major AI labs on specific use cases. And it's like really hard to emphasize this point. If you go looking inside most of the AI labs and you say, who works on education, you will eventually get routed to a person, and that person helps you use their API credits. That's what it means to work on education.
Yeah.
Because most of the time, what they're trying to do is just improve the core model. Now, what they're noticing is that there's a ton of education use happening with their core models, and they're now trying to catch up. So like a lot of the companies have launched learn mode because one of the things they've noticed is these models are very quick to give you the answer. And like if you just give the student the answer, it's good for cheating, but not good for learning, right? So there are these sort of questions. So the interesting thing is there's a huge role, whether for government, for philanthropy, just for funders, to basically say, what is the infrastructure for applied use cases, right? So what are these models bad at that if you had better data, you had better tooling, you had better test environments, you could like rapidly develop. So all the other fields are doing this. So all this interest that's happening in AI and bio, what are they doing? They're building custom facilities where you can both test these models, but then bring them into a wet lab setting. They're doing lots of foundational models that are actually built on, not words, but, genetic data. All of the fields are going. And so if education wants to get specialized performance, and if it just waits for the big AI companies to solve it, it has to sit on a very long list of other use cases that are going to come first. Workplace productivity is going to come first. Bio is going to come first. Like education is just like not on the first. I mean, I talked to the senior company. They're like, education is not on our top 5, probably not on our top 10. It's just like a big enough sector. So either we're like, it's all going to work out, right? Like
Magic is usually the thing to hope on.
Just
Absolutely.
give it time. Just give it time.
It could work out at some broad level, right? The technology keeps getting better for very motivated learners. It works. But I think for everything else, if there is not a set of folks who are thinking about what are the specialized data, technology, and others that is going to make this stuff usable, you're kind of just waiting. And I just think that like people underestimate how little is happening inside the companies.
I love that you said education is not enough big enough sector when every single person goes through education. Right?
Yeah.
It's not a big enough slice of the financial pie.
Yeah.
But it is definitely
you were saying this.
in terms of the human pie, right?
I think it's massive.
Yeah.
It's just one big client has 50% of the market.
Right.
Fernando, you want to dive into that maybe a little bit more? And I know in your previous response, you talked about the feedback loop that needs to exist between the educator, the student, and the product development. You also talked about how education affects so many people. So maybe you can even broaden your response to think about how can we ensure collaboration across innovators and investors and developers and across all of the people who should be involved is actually happening. What should that look like?
So First, with strong beliefs, but somewhat weakly held, which means that maybe you shouldn't be listening to anything I say. But I think in this in this space of AI and education, pretty much everyone has strong beliefs, weakly held, and we can change them easily because it's new. So that's a disclaimer, no? There's certain things that I want to fight on a hill right now if I have to, and infrastructure. When I think of infrastructure, it's more about the set of rules, parameters that will shape certain behaviors more than the cables and wires, because in the end, most kids, at least in this country, already have a device connected. So the set of behaviors that I think the infrastructure needs to focus on, one is on this rapid experimentation. I'll just double down on my previous comment that we have to let teachers, treat teachers with the dignity that they deserve, in that they're capable people that chose a profession, and they should be able to choose certain technologies based on what they know about their students. And to have that type of infrastructure that sets that behavior means that it's not just letting teachers decide, but also the assessment whether this technology is working or not sits at a level above the teacher, with the standardized testing at the end of each year or each semester or whatnot, that you can easily see if there's some improvement over certain technologies. And so that's one, the infrastructure required to do that. I think another piece of the infrastructure that also shapes behaviors that has to do with the actual technology, AI in itself, the way that LLMs are constructed today, are built, I'm going to exaggerate a bit for sense of humor maybe, where if you split the world of students in two categories, there are the nerds that self-learn, self-motivate to study, and that's about 5% of the student population, and then 95% of the students are the fun kids that are not the nerds, that don't motivate on their own.
Be careful with these terms.
I know. I'm sorry, guys.
Know your audience.
They are not self-learners. And when you think of Coursera, the MOOCs, which was supposed to be the solution for education, roughly 5% of people that enroll in a course finish the course. So it's a 95% attrition. I've enrolled in 30-some courses at Coursera. I haven't finished one. So assume that having Einstein as your tutor when you open your laptop back home is going to be fantastic for 5% of the student population. Because the other 95% of the students are going to open the computers, Einstein, shut it down, and go play with their friends. Because, so what I mean by infrastructure is that the vast majority of students are not self-learners and self-motivate. They need to be motivated, and the structure of motivation for students, I think it's peers, I think it's group study. Carefully well-crafted group study, of course. And right now, we challenge any one of you to use any LLM, any chatbot, to invite a friend and have a chat, two friends, humans, with one bot. It doesn't happen. So I think infrastructure, we have to stop thinking about the one-on-one environment of technology applications in education, because they're fantastic for that 5% self-motivated that become better and better and better and better. We have to start thinking of the not motivated students that need something else.
Yeah, I think that's really important. So much of how humans exist in the world is through community. And so how do our tech systems reinforce or enable how we exist in the world? Or when I saw you wanting to jump in.
I just wanted to maybe build a little bit on what everyone on this panel has said prior to me here on this question, which is, I'll come back, Kumar, you talked about how corporations or companies, they're not necessarily incentivized to play in the education or education tech or whatever you want to call it in this space as much, right? I think that actually feeds to an important point that we should all be contemplating. And I'm not suggesting that this is easy, but the notion of when does it make sense for us to view this as an ecosystem with folks from across different sectors, each with their own sort of stated interests stated incentives or purposes, and how do you try to work to bring those into alignment to create a coalition of the willing, right? So yes, it is the case that, going back to something I said at the outset, the education environment is noisy, it's messy, it's complex, right? It's a focus on the student or a focus on the student and the teacher. None of that is necessarily, and for our companies in the room, I don't mean to be disrespectful to your interests, but I don't think any of that is easy for a company to start to chomp on, right? Especially when you think about near-term productization and bottom lines and earnings values and so forth. But the notion of figuring out how you can, what is the incentive for a company to engage? Most of these companies need talent at the end of the day to be able to be at the front lines of AI or quantum or biotechnology or whatever the technology area is that we're focusing on. And so to have talent, you need folks at the K through 12 levels starting to be excited and engaged in STEM and stick with it to get to a point where they're ready to go into that workforce. So there is an incentive. It may not be a head-on incentive with regard to the education technology that we're focusing on at any given moment or the education technology innovation that we want to facilitate, but there is an incentive on the part of companies to want to be able to engage. There's incentive on the part of philanthropy to want to be able to help engage and address these issues. Government has a role, as we've talked about here, right? And so I think thinking about ways in which you can fashion public-private partnerships that span across these sectors, recognizing that each one is going to have sort of their own value add could be, or their own position in that ecosystem could be a means to being able to sort of help continue to catalyze and drive and accelerate even that innovation while acknowledging some of the pain points around that. So I'll give you an example. We funded a project, I think it was called AI for Georgia a number of years ago, right? And the focus of the project, the NSF funding, was around instructional material development for middle schoolers to be exposed to AI, potentially for the real authentic exposure to AI, not just necessarily playing with the chat GPT or other LLM. And that was an investment that we made out of NSF to be able to facilitate some of that instructional material. We tried to ensure that there was an evaluation component to it, that it was rigorous and engaging curriculum or instructional material. And then over time, we've had private sector partners, particularly Google now, come in and say, well, this is exciting. This is seeming to add value. Let's now see if we can work with you to be able to scale what you're doing in Georgia to places like Texas and Florida and other parts of the country as well. So I think whether it be infrastructure, it be the research, or it be some combination of that, facilitating these types of cross-sector relationships where you understand and appreciate what the incentive structure is for each sector could be a means to being able to break through some of the otherwise challenges that we face.
I think those are great points. Identifying and aligning incentives is so important. And Leigh Ann, as you mentioned earlier, we all go through the education system, and companies really require talent that has been educated somewhere. So thank you to those of you who submitted questions. There were a handful of questions about safeguards and how do we ensure that AI, how it is used in education, is used in ways that minimizes harm. I anticipated this might be a question that came up, so I asked, looks like Gemini, why should AI not be used in education? And Gemini said, concerns about academic dishonesty, decreased critical thinking skills, and ethical issues related to data privacy. While AI offers potential benefits like personalized learning, these concerns warrant careful consideration before widespread implementation. So even our AI is telling us we should be concerned.
Yeah.
And so I want to pose that back to the panel, and maybe Kumar, will start with you. How do we balance the urgency to innovate with the need to protect students?
I mean, I think one of the challenges is, at least right now, for the major AI firms, this is my take. So this is just my sort of take on the industry. The lesson from the social media firms was, if you start to interact with students as an actual business product, you run into a lot of problems, because then when things go badly, that was your product and you marketed to students. And so I think that you've seen a lot of usage by folks under 18 of these products, but it's happening kind of in the wild. Hey, we're putting these AI models out there, these are tools, and students are using them. I think now as like usage has really proliferated, people are now starting to notice all the like, well, what are gonna be the challenges? So of course, the first one that everyone predicted was just cheating. You know, I would say this is as much on the educational system as it is on the developers, which is there are still, especially on the college side, there are faculty members who have done nothing about the fact that like, you know, I mean, every faculty member I talk to says, I know most of the content that's coming my way, if I give a written assignment, does not track the way the student speaks to me out loud versus what they have written. And like, that disconnect is like rapidly increasing. So some faculty members have said, oh, I need to go back to Blue Book exams. Oh, I need to go. So the point just being is like it's just all happening quickly, and these systems don't adapt very quickly. The second one is on the K-12 side, is on terms of service. Teachers are experimenting. Sometimes they're dropping lots of PII into these systems. Then the school administrator is like, wait a minute, what did you upload? You know, like we haven't signed a vendor agreement. We don't. And often these tools do actually have capabilities, but you have to turn those on. You have to say, oh, you know, don't save the transcript, or don't have it stay on site. All these things are doable, but if you just say, well, I'm just trying it out, but I did upload all my information, you know. So I think we're very early in this transition. So people are making all these mistakes live. They're like, and so I think some of this will get worked out in the sense of people will become more AI natives. If you remember early days of the internet, there was the walled garden approach. Like you go to this library computer and you can't actually access the internet. And like everyone at some point was like, that is not how we're gonna help children learn about the internet, because eventually they will have the internet and we might as well. So I think there's gonna be some version of you're gonna have to build AI natives who know all the challenges. I just think that right now people are not underappreciating how much usage has picked up. And so whether it's parents, whether it's teachers, and then you're gonna have to actually have line of sight on all the, you know, like what's that actually doing, and are there changes you need to make?
Yeah. Yes. Sorry, you said so much. My brain is going in 3 different directions at a time, and I'm trying to figure out which one is going to win out in my brain. So in the meantime, Leigh Ann, though, I wanted to come to you because Kumar is pointing out that we are learning about AI in education as we are delivering AI in education, and as we are adapting to AI powered products in education. But we already know a lot about what works in education. So what are some of the lessons that we should be taking from what we know of years of education and research into what makes for effective education systems? What are some of these lessons that we should be applying even as we examine how AI should be used?
Yeah, and I think there's as you're thinking about like venture capital and wanting companies to be efficient in the way they get to high quality products, using the research that's been out for decades probably gets them to a more effective product faster than sitting a bunch of developers in a room with someone who is a few teachers, a couple of ex-teachers, and saying like, what do you all do, right? And so I think there's a lot of work that's come through the federal government, actually, the Institute for Education Sciences, the way they collect promising practices, colleagues across the realm that can help guide product development and short cycle those like effective development. I also want to say when we fail hard. I'm going to say that again. When we fail hard. We are not in a place where when you give an open tool for communication to a teenager who may or may not be struggling with everything we know kids are struggling with today, right? That having the ability for them to figure out what works and not, and for us to figure out where the guidelines are, is something we can let happen authentically, right? We're using AI on students. Teachers are using math software that all of a sudden has a chat box in it, right? With little to no assurances on the guardrails of that chat box, right? SRI does amazing studies helping students navigate mental health issues while they're also navigating school, right? Many of our researchers do amazing work to work with teachers and administrators to carefully support students through some of the hardest times of their lives. I don't know about you all. I have a 7th grader who's starting school next week. Middle school sucks, right? And it sucks even more now. And to give an open chatbot that's willing to pretend you're talking to me about X and all of a sudden you bop out of the math software, right, is really hard. So I think when we think about privacy, we've been dealing with student data for a really long time. We have to do better about educating what it means to upload things to these platforms. We also need to think about the reverse, like how do we make sure that the AI in its broad applicability, as you were talking about, like the general use cases, isn't driving outcomes that like are the worst possible things in the space.
Yeah, and I think on how we do that, Fernando, there was a question actually specifically for you in the feedback loop that you first talked about, which is when you have this feedback loop and you're working with students, you're working with educators, you're working with product developers. How do you, what are some guidelines you have for avoiding bad outcomes? And so making sure that feedback loop leads to a positive outcome. And I see our timer in the audience is reminding me that we have only a few minutes. But if you want to take a minute or two to respond to what is this theme here of how we ensure safety in these tools, what can be done in strengthening that feedback loop?
So I'm not sure I have the right answer in that the typical feedback loop, if you're at a startup, let's say you're at the product development side of things. So you push a product with certain functionality. The teacher is willing to test it out on the students. The students test it out, and some feedback form comes back in, again, engagement, results, exam prep, whatever it is, the outcome. That both teacher and product developer have visibility of the dashboard, not necessarily the student. So feedback is immediate in that sense for both of them. The question is, how do you avoid bad outcomes, I think it is. I cannot answer that without the assumption of do no harm, good intentions, both on the product side of the company and from the teacher side. You can always come up with the idea that the company is evil or they just want to make money, and even if it causes harm. But that's sort of a tough thing to say. So again, I don't think I can answer the question without getting to the point of assumption of good intentions do no harm on the teacher and the product development of the company. But the feedback is immediate. You have that dashboard right there seeing engagement. Engagement, by the way, I think in education, are the kids engaged in this platform, yes or no? That already directionally, I think, points to the exact location of where it's headed.
And I think the immediacy of the feedback loop is important and sort of brings us back to where we started, of even though AI is advancing rapidly, as every headline will tell us whether or not we feel like paying attention to it in the moment. People are making decisions today about what education needs to look like. So I think we covered a lot today. We covered money, we covered incentives, we covered collaboration, we covered safeguards. We've covered more than I'm remembering right now to even recap. But I know for those of you in the room, we've got a reception afterwards where all the panelists will be available to continue these conversations, and hope that you all will continue these conversations as well in your respective workspaces. So thank you again to our panelist, Leigh Ann DeLyser, the Director for the Center of Education, Research and Innovation from SRI, Erwin Gianchandani, the Assistant Director for Technology, Innovation and Partnerships at the National Science Foundation, Kumar Garg, the President at Renaissance Philanthropy, and Fernando Fabre, the CEO at Kauffman Fellows. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Afua, and thank you again to all the panelists. I know I really enjoyed this. I know I'm sure everybody in the audience did as well. As Afua mentioned, we do have a reception right over here off to my left. Great views of downtown DC, as well as some good food and eats, and a chance to continue this conversation. I think I talked a little bit at the start about SRI and the fact that we really look at not just the science, but having impact. And I think the impact really starts now. This isn't just kind of we come in, we have a discussion, listen to a bunch of great panelists, and then leave and don't talk about this again. This is all about creating the network, creating the ecosystem, and really continuing that with the folks that you'll meet today, the folks you'll talk to, and the engagements that you can continue to have with our panelists. So thank you again very much, everybody, for coming. Looking forward to talking to more people at the reception. Thank you.